Nestled among the rolling hills of northern Georgia, the town of Waverly was the kind of place people described as safe. A two-stoplight community where Sunday service was sacred. Neighbors knew each other by name, and crime seemed like something that only happened on the evening news. But in early June of 2014, that illusion was shattered in the most unimaginable way by the very man the town trusted most. Pastor Elijah Moore was a pillar of Waverly. At 52, he led the New Light Missionary Baptist Church, a growing congregation housed in a modest red brick building just off the main road. His sermons were filled with warmth and fire, drawing people in with a mix of old-school conviction and fatherly charm. He officiated weddings, counseled troubled couples, and visited the sick. In many households, his word held more weight than the law. Behind the pulpit, Pastor Moore lived with his wife, Marie, and their 3 children, 2 boys and a daughter, 17-year-old Sarah. From the outside, they looked like a picture-perfect family. Sarah was known to be soft-spoken and deeply involved in church youth programs. She played piano during Sunday service and often stayed late to help clean up. No one ever suspected the storm brewing behind closed doors. According to neighbors, the Moore household became increasingly isolated in the months leading up to the tragedy. Sarah stopped attending school and was reportedly being homeschooled by her father. Marie, once active in the church women's group, pulled away and was seen less frequently at services. Friends described her as nervous and always looking over her shoulder. The first real sign that something was wrong came in the form of a whispered rumor that Sarah Moore was pregnant. A teenage pregnancy in a small town is enough to stir gossip, but what followed was unthinkable. An anonymous tip, phoned into the Waverly Sheriff's Office, suggested that Pastor Moore was not only the father of the unborn child, but had plans to leave his family and marry his daughter. The sheriff initially dismissed the call as a cruel hoax. Pastor Moore was a respected man. Accusations like that didn't just challenge his character, they ripped at the heart of the community. But more calls followed, and soon, whispers grew louder. One parishioner claimed to have seen Pastor Moore and Sarah behaving too close in private moments. Another found a handwritten note in the church office, allegedly from Sarah, describing a love too powerful for the world to understand. Still, no one dared confront the pastor directly. He carried too much weight, commanded too much trust, and perhaps, deep down, no one wanted to believe it could be true. Then came June 17th, a day that would forever change Waverly. Started like any other Tuesday. The sun rose early and strong. Pastor Moore was seen tending to the church garden. Sarah was spotted in a nearby pharmacy, purchasing prenatal vitamins. By 6 p.m., the Moore family home was silent. At 8:43 p.m., a frantic 911 call came from a neighbor. "There's gunfire at the Moore's house. I heard screaming, then nothing." When deputies arrived, they found the front door ajar and the scene inside horrific. Marie Moore was found in the kitchen, shot once in the chest. The 2 sons, aged 14 and 10, were found in their bedrooms, each shot in their sleep. Upstairs, Sarah was alive but critically wounded, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Pastor Moore was nowhere to be found. Sarah was airlifted to a nearby trauma center. Her survival was uncertain, but investigators hoped she might be able to shed light on what had happened. The search for Elijah Moore launched immediately. Local police, state troopers, and even the FBI were involved. For 48 hours, the town was on lockdown, its people stunned and afraid. What had driven the man they trusted with their souls to such darkness? Then, on June 20th, just 3 days later, a hiker discovered a body in the woods 5 miles outside of town. It was Elijah Moore. He had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Next to him was a blood-stained Bible and a torn wedding photo. Marie's face scratched out. The story should have ended there, but what followed would only deepen the mystery, challenge the truth, and force an entire town to question how well they really knew the man they called Pastor. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Waverly's small-town calm gave way to suspicion, grief, and endless questions. People gathered in prayer circles, lighting candles and crying together on church pews that had once echoed with Pastor Moore's voice. But even as the community mourned, a darker reality began to emerge, one that had been hiding behind the sanctity of the pulpit. Sarah Moore, barely clinging to life in a hospital bed, became the centerpiece of the investigation. When she finally regained consciousness, detectives were ready. Gently, cautiously, they asked her what happened that night, and what she revealed shattered any remaining illusions about her father. In a series of interviews, Sarah detailed years of manipulation and abuse. She said her father had begun grooming her shortly after her 15th birthday. Under the guise of spiritual guidance, Pastor Moore had isolated her from her friends and the rest of the world. He convinced her that their relationship was ordained by God, that she was his soulmate, chosen to continue a divine bloodline. She described how he used scripture to rationalize their illicit relationship, cherry-picking verses and twisting meanings to justify what he was doing. Sarah said she was terrified to tell her mother, fearing it would tear the family apart, or worse, lead to more violence. According to Sarah, when she became pregnant, Pastor Moore told her it was a gift and that they would start over somewhere far away. But Marie, her mother, eventually discovered the truth. Sarah recalled a heated argument the night before the murders. Her mother had confronted Elijah, threatening to go to the police. That, Sarah believed, sealed the family's fate. Investigators cross-referenced Sarah's claims with physical evidence. They found secret journals in Elijah Moore's locked study, filled with disturbing entries, coded prayers, personal justifications, and detailed plans to cleanse the house of resistance. His internet history included articles on suicide pacts, familial annihilation, and legal loopholes in incest laws. Even more disturbing were a series of deleted emails recovered from his church computer. Sent to a friend in Texas, an excommunicated preacher known for fringe religious beliefs, they discussed spiritual marriage, the dangers of secular interference, and a plan to begin anew with the chosen one. What shook the community most wasn't just the horror of what Elijah had done, but how long he had concealed it. Parishioners recalled subtle moments they had ignored. Sarah flinching when touched, Elijah insisting she stop going to youth group events, Marie's sudden withdrawal from social life. Looking back, the signs were there, but no one had wanted to see them. The church board disbanded within weeks. The New Light Missionary Baptist Church was closed permanently, its windows boarded up and its sign removed. The congregation scattered, some to neighboring churches, others to no church at all. Meanwhile, Sarah, though slowly recovering physically, faced a long road ahead. She was placed under protective care, and Child Protective Services took custody of her unborn child. A legal petition was filed to seal her identity and records to prevent further trauma. Media outlets across the country picked up the story. Headlines called it "The Pastor's Sin," "Heaven's Betrayal," and "The Gospel of Lies." Cable news turned Waverly into a spectacle. But beneath the sensationalism was a real, broken young woman and a shattered town trying to make sense of how faith had been weaponized. Some called Elijah Moore a monster. Others insisted he must have had a mental breakdown. But Sarah's testimony and the evidence told a different story. One of cold calculation, spiritual manipulation, and an obsession so deep it destroyed an entire family. Still, questions remained. Had anyone else known? Were there others who had turned a blind eye, or worse, helped cover it up? And why, after everything, did Elijah Moore take his own life only 3 days after committing such atrocities? The answers, like much of this story, would remain buried beneath layers of fear, guilt, and silence. On the evening of June 17th, the quiet streets of Waverly were pierced by a single, chilling 911 call. The voice on the other end, trembling and breathless, reported hearing gunfire coming from the Moore residence. It sounded like for maybe 5 shots, and screaming. Then it stopped. Deputies were dispatched immediately. What they found inside the modest 2-story home would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The front door was open. A trail of blood led from the kitchen to the hallway. In the kitchen, Marie Moore lay slumped against a cabinet. A bullet wound through her chest, a look of shock frozen on her face. Officers moved through the home with weapons drawn, calling out. Upstairs, Sarah Moore was found barely alive, crumpled on the floor outside her bedroom. She had been shot in the stomach. Her eyes fluttered open just long enough to whisper her father's name. In the boys' room, the horror deepened. Elijah Jr., 14, and Samuel, 10, had been shot while they slept, each with a single, precise bullet to the head. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds. It was as if Pastor Moore had crept through the house with surgical intent, eliminating anyone who might stop him from carrying out his unholy plan. The responding officers couldn't understand it. This wasn't the work of a desperate man. It was calculated, cold. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of an outside intruder. The killer had known the house, its routines, its blind spots, and had moved methodically. The only person missing was Elijah Moore himself. The manhunt began before sunrise. State troopers, local law enforcement, and volunteers combed the woods, highways, and abandoned properties. The FBI was brought in due to the nature of the crimes and the growing media frenzy. Flyers with Pastor Moore's face were plastered across the region. Armed and dangerous. Do not approach. Meanwhile, Sarah was rushed into surgery. The doctors weren't optimistic. The bullet had missed her spine by millimeters and punctured part of her intestine. But she survived. Barely. The hospital staff placed her under armed guard as the investigation intensified. For 3 days, Waverly sat on edge. Rumors swirled. Some said Pastor Moore had fled to Mexico. Others believed he had been killed by someone trying to protect Sarah. The most popular theory? That he was hiding out in the woods, waiting for the right time to finish what he started. Then, on June 20th, a hiker discovered the body. It was in a clearing 5 miles outside town, beneath a large oak tree. Pastor Elijah Moore was dead, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Beside him were a blood-stained Bible, a photo of Sarah as a child, and a wedding ring not his own, believed to have belonged to Marie. The scene was equal parts murder-suicide and ritual. A hastily scribbled letter was tucked into the Bible's final pages. In it, Elijah confessed to the killings but framed them as a sacrifice to cleanse our path. He claimed he and Sarah were destined to be together in the new Eden, and that the rest of the family had stood in the way of God's will. The letter was rambling, peppered with scripture, and chilling in its lack of remorse. Authorities released a statement confirming his death and declared the case closed. But for many in Waverly, the closure was hollow. The house on Maple Drive was boarded up, its windows dark. No one wanted to walk past it. Children crossed the street rather than ride their bikes near the property. The funeral services for Marie, Elijah Jr., and Samuel were held together. Hundreds turned out. Sarah, still recovering, could not attend. Her absence was felt as profoundly as the caskets lowered into the earth. Pastor Moore was buried separately, in an unmarked grave at a private site after no church would accept his remains. The town struggled to understand what had happened. How had a man so revered become capable of such evil? And how had no one seen the signs? The case drew national attention, but the people of Waverly were left to deal with the fallout. The guilt, the silence, the broken faith. As weeks passed, new questions arose. Why were certain church files missing? Why did Pastor Moore have sealed letters addressed to unknown recipients? What had he planned if Sarah hadn't survived? Each question chipped away at the neat narrative that authorities tried to present. And for Sarah, recovery was more than physical. She was now the lone survivor of a massacre that shattered not just a family, but a community's sense of trust. In the weeks after Pastor Elijah Moore's body was discovered, Waverly became a town divided, not by geography, but by belief. Some still clung to the idea that Moore had suffered a mental break, a moment of madness that led to unthinkable violence. Others were convinced he had been living a double life for years, his public sermons masking deep-rooted depravity and delusion. For Sarah, healing was both slow and public. She was placed in the care of extended family in another state, her identity protected by court order. Her child, born prematurely due to the trauma, was placed in the custody of child services pending further evaluation. News crews continued to follow her story, but legal walls were erected to protect her from further exploitation. Despite everything, Sarah survived. not just physically, but emotionally. Through therapy, support, and an unwavering will, she began telling her story behind closed doors to advocates, abuse survivors, and justice organizations. Though she remained largely out of the public eye, her testimony played a crucial role in expanding policies on clergy abuse and incest laws in Georgia. Meanwhile, investigators reopened aspects of the case after discovering a cache of encrypted files on Pastor Moore's church computer. Within them were transcripts of private online conversations with fringe religious figures, outlines of purification rituals, and an unsettling document titled Rebuilding the House of David. While most of the content was disjointed and conspiratorial, it painted a clearer picture of Moore's descent into messianic delusion. What troubled investigators most, however, was evidence suggesting Moore had communicated with others, people who may have encouraged or at least known about his plans. None were ever charged. Some disappeared completely from public view. The town of Waverly attempted to move on, but scars lingered. The New Light Missionary Baptist Church was demolished a year later. In its place now stands a community garden dedicated to victims of domestic violence and abuse. On the garden's entrance, a plaque reads, "To those failed by faith, may truth be your light." The Moore family home remained vacant for years before it, too, was torn down. In its place, a modest memorial bench sits under a tree. Children now play nearby again, though parents still glance at the spot with unease. As time passed, the media moved on to new horrors, new scandals. But for those who lived through the tragedy, the story never ended. A few still gather each year on June 17th to light candles and leave flowers. Not just for the lives lost, but for the truth that was buried with them. In the end, this wasn't just a story of one man's descent into darkness. It was a cautionary tale about trust, unchecked power, and the dangers of silence. It was about the blind reverence often given to religious authority, and the price a family paid for that reverence. Sarah Moore's name, once synonymous with scandal, now stands as a symbol of survival. Her voice, once silenced by fear, continues to ripple through survivor networks, legal reform panels, and private testimonies. And Pastor Elijah Moore? His name lives on, not in sermons or scripture, but in case studies, documentaries, and the haunted memories of those who once called him their shepherd. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join our growing true crime community.